Imagine your history like a timeline. How many highs and lows have you lived? Joys, pain, things you overcame, obstacles, and the truth that the line is not so linear. Several factors, internal and external ones, influence ours in our journey, and they become unique and complex. But what if we could be responsible for a small stimulus that could impact positively a whole life? What if we created the opportunity to mitigate vulnerabilities and somehow change a trajectory? We believe that yes, it is possible, and that's why since 2003 we support inspiring projects with the goal of incentivate the social protagonism. We believe we can generate impact today, so happier versions of this history can be written in a near future. CPFL Institute. It's an energy that transforms reality. Hello, guys. We would like to share this moment with you. 2023, Café Filosófico at CPFL has its 20th anniversary. Over 950 talks with over 3 hours of recording, more than 2,000 episodes at TV Cultura, a digital community with almost 1 million people, 1,200 videos on YouTube with over 42 million visualizations. And in 20 years, we have built more than numbers. We have built relations. We connected histories. All of that was only possible because you are part of this history. So Café thanks the technical team and all of our friends, speakers, curators, and a special thanks to you. For you to have an idea of the topics we discussed in over 2 decades, we are going to see some of the speakers that were part of this history. Hello. In Café Filosófico, a partnership of TV Cultura and CPFL Energia. And how is the love relationship happening in the modern? What is desire? What do women always hid from men and from themselves? We are more afraid now than we were in the past? Or men have always been a tormented animal? So we are facing small and big decisions, this or that, right or wrong, good or bad, can we or can't we? So far this flame doesn't burn inside us and flame all around us, what should we do? Who broke the law of eternity who doesn't allow to restart life? So if the idleness is the beginning of all vices, it's very close from all virtues. I've learned that my strength is exactly knowing all the weaknesses that were pointed out for me. How can the configuration of work change the social aspect of Brazil? Today we are going to ask ourselves, is there a good drug? Art is a way of feeling the desire of the object. What has become doesn't matter to art, and the pursuit for each one is different. What is fiction for? To explain and interpret the human reality, through fantasy. Good evening. Welcome to another recording of Café Filosófico CPFL. Welcome all of you here in Campinas that are here for recording the program, and everyone that are with us on Instagram, on YouTube, and who are watching on YouTube on recording or the video afterwards. I invite you all to subscribe to our channel to learn firsthand about our program and to keep up on the new videos that we have every week. And today we start a new module, Traditional Chinese Medicine, Self-Care and Life Preservation, with the curatorship of Bruno de Conte and the Institute Confucio of Unicamp. We are going to have simultaneous translation into English, and to access the transmission, just use the link on the description. And the topic today is traditional Chinese medicine, self-care and life preservation with Nelson Filice de Barros. So let's have applauses for our guest of the night. Nelson is a professor of social science applied to health in the Medical Sciences University of Unicamp. He is coordinator of alternative practice, integrative and complementary practice of La Paz, and the part of the research committee International Sociological Association. Nelson, welcome to Café Filosófico CPFL. The floor is yours. Thank you, Felipe. Good evening to everyone. It is a joy to be here, and I would like to start with a saying that was written by Isaac Newton in the 17th century, which is, "If I saw further, it was because I was on the shoulder of giants." And with saying, I greet my masters, the ones that have already passed away and the ones that are still with us, and all the ancestors. And I would like to share this image, which is the Cueva de las Manos, a cave that is in Argentina of 9,000 or 5,000 years ago, which is a celebration, an invitation to celebrate our history. And now I'm trying to rescue a little bit of this history in my talk today. And I'm going to talk about the event of the contemporary culture, but to talk about our contemporary culture without being hypocriticism, I'm going to recover some historical elements, elements of our history as a species in this planet. And my idea is starting off with bringing some attributes, presenting some attributes that we have as species and that operate over us nowadays and challenges us yet. So around 150 million years ago, there was a revolution, which was the revolution of care. There are some fossils that show that certain members of groups had this bone callus formation, especially on their femur, which means that for that person to recover, they had to be looked after. So this is an attribute of our species that we learned around 150,000 years ago. If we hadn't learned how to take care, we would be extinct from planet. Our breeds are born completely dependent. We have to warm, feed, protect them until they are minimally independent, right? So all of us are here because we were looked after and we keep taking care, looking after. So this is one of the attributes of the species that is very important because it also has to do with another attribute that was before this one, which is learning. Why are these two attributes so important? Because we got it right more than we get it wrong. So we got here because we have learned to do certain actions, protective actions, maintenance actions, that made our life possible. So around 70,000 years ago, there was another evolution that is the cognitive evolution. Rumor has it that this cognitive evolution became possible because of some magical mushroom ingestion. But the truth is that in 70,000 years, what really happened was the development of another ability or another attribute, if we want to call it that way, which is the impulse of communication and representation. Fundamentally, why do we speak? We speak because we notice, we feel, we think differently. As I need to explain myself, or I try to make it clear what I'm feeling or perceiving, I try to find ways of expressing myself, of representing, and this is an attribute of 70,000 years that we have as a species, and that also creates two key elements. One, precisely because of the ability of representation and language, it is the luminous experience, which is the contact with the sacred. And the other experience is precisely at that moment of language representation, is the construction of abstract technologies of collective control. I'm going back to this concept further on. So there is a part of some time later, but a little before that, let me invite a first reading that is going to be presented to us. I'm going to read a part of a brief history of humanity. For 2.5 million years, humans collected plants and hunted, who lived and procreated without their intervention. All of that changed around 10,000 years ago when it was a revolution on the way humans lived. It was the agricultural revolution. Wheat and the goats were domesticated around 9,000 years before Christ, then peas and lentils a little before Christ, and then the olive trees 8,000 years, horses 4,000 years before Christ, and the vineyards before 3,000 before Christ. And then the wave of domestication had reached to an end a little bit later, but today with our advanced technology, over 90% of the calories that feed humanity come from this amount of plants that our ancestors domesticated around 9,500 and 3,500 years before Christ. No plant or important animal was domesticated in the past 2,000 years. There is no signal of people becoming more intelligent over time. Instead of coming up with a new era of calm life, the agricultural revolution gave to farmers a harder and less gratifying life than the herders and hunters. So the agricultural revolution increased the amount of food available for humanity, but extra food did not become a better diet or more leisure. On average, a farmer would work more than a hunter and would have in return a worse kind of diet. The agricultural revolution was the biggest fraud in humanity. So we get to agricultural revolution 2000 years later with the attributes of learning, of taking care, of communicating, of experiencing the contact with the holy, with the sacred. And at that moment, the groups are fixed. And as doing so, the greatest fraud in history, as Harari described, is a fraud in the sense that we used to live in a paradigm of abundance, a paradigm of this change, this dislocation, giving access to different food, different species, and the possibility of exploring different frontiers. Being fixed in a place gives us the paradigm of scarcity. And with this paradigm, we learn over 12,000 years, we learn to prospect, which basically means the fact that we have to think ahead because we are fixed. Food has a restricted production condition, and at a certain time, when there is a lack of it, I need to have stock. So the experience of starting thinking ahead, and together with this experience of thinking ahead, This paradigm of scarcity brings to us more power and the fear of the human, because as of then, that stock that was reserved, if it is stolen, there is no dislocation to other territories in which our life would be insured. So at that moment, the human becomes to work with the notion of fear rather than solidarity. It's the moment of building more walls than bridges.
So this is the sense as the biggest fraud of history, the fixation. Because on one side it produced more food, but it got poorer in the quality of food. It replaced the paradigm of abundance for scarcity. And with the scarcity, we have developed prospection. More than prospection, we developed the skill of the war, of protection, of the fear of the human. So that's part of our inherent. So to tell the story of 150,000 years ago, it's a crime. But the idea is to talk about the contemporary. That's why I'm going fast through this part. So 5,000 years ago, we have the registration of the first emperor. So the idea of emperor is quite important because we were groups that would be dislocated, that would be fixated and started getting some clans that got together. They became tribes, and tribes that got together and created an empire. Right at this point of the empire, it starts coincidentally, more or less 5,000 years ago, the recording of the first, let's say, medical rationalities. This is a concept developed in 1990 by a sociologist, a Brazilian sociologist, Amabel Luz, and that certainly it's a concept that if it was written in English, it would be adopted by the health organization because it explains how it was created, how it was registered. Each different medical system or the complex of practice that created medicine. In the 90s, there was a common speech that was medicine is one thing. No, it's not just one thing. It comes from a set of practice, cultural practice. So we live in a different way in the planet and we have different types of caring. And this medical rationality that starts being designed 5,000 years ago and start being recorded 5,000 years ago, they are fundamented in some ways of explaining the cosmos of where we came from, how we were created. This is a heritage of 7,000 years, so it's not something new to represent this. And with this perspective, we start building a doctrine, a medicine for the medicine. So it discusses of an idea of how to understand the bodies, the way of it works, that's the physiology, and on the morphology, the shape, and more than this, it develops a set of practice for diagnosis and a set of practice that we have for therapeutics. So our heritage that we have for the traditional medicine or the recordings for the traditional medicines that we could put the classic Chinese medicine as a traditional medicine, as Ayurvedic, as other practice for the Amerindians people, the set of this practice, now called traditional medicines, it started being recorded and built 5,000 years ago. We have a video of a therapeutic technique created 2,000 years ago that we're going to show now. That's a technique of the use of incense. in the Chinese medicine that we have the incense with Taoism. And it is from this set of techniques that we have a medical rationality. So let's watch the video, please. Ishangante's ceremonial incense is traditional Chinese culture. The original purpose of incense is to heal and avoid diseases. So in the process of treating disease, men found out that the incense not only is good, as also has a refreshing effect. So in this process of use, we have this ceremony culture. So this combination of the Chinese incense and Tao, the ceremony, the incense is the essence of the matter. So in the process of developing incense, a lot of tools were produced. So here I would like to show the incense burner, the incense box, and some incense utensils. So we have that include auxiliary tongs, the incense press, and the first incense press, spoons, presses for the ashes, and the incense tongs. To collect the burned ashes. This is used to compact the powder, this spatula. In the incense mold, during the process, this is the mold. It is rich in details. It has drawings to allow the produced incense to burn continuously from beginning to end. After we finish pressing the mold, the incense will burn from end to end. There are many types of incense in powder, in pieces. This is the original incense. There's also a type that's very common in Brazil. Incense in sticks. The incense is burned in an incense burner or censer, where the ash is removed and placed in another jar. After complete the mold and pressing it, smelling the ashes is also a key part of the process. The host must try the fragrance first and then pass it on to the guests, who will try the fragrance and pass it on. This is the general process of the incense ceremony. The importance of having this presentation and having a technique like this is that we accumulate as a species learning capabilities, capabilities of taking care, of communicating, of representing, and capabilities to create knowledge that can be reproduced. So we as a species, we got it more right than wrong, and we get 500 in another revolution, that's the scientific revolution. I'm going to have some criticism to science, but I will not deny science. It's important to mention this. The sociology of science, to think about the logics that condition the production of knowledge, is not to deny science. So 500 years, we got to this experiment that science, it's really important to understand that science is part of a bigger project. And the bigger project to which the science is associated with, it's a colonization process project. It's a project of developing the capitalist relationships and the development of slavery of people. So the science comes from a project. It doesn't build in a vacuum, and it has a way of doing this that it recovers what we had as an asset of the species. So one of the fundamentals of science is the paradigm of scarcity. Science in the last 50, 500 years is not being done with abundancy. We have the experience of creating more knowledge for war than for any other thing of human survival. So this is something. A second point is this relationship between the fear of human and solidarity, building bridges and walls. Taking care is part of being part of solidarity. But the entire experience is in a paradigm of scarcity, and the science got stronger in what 7,000 years ago we had as the beginning, that are the abstract technologies of collective control. What does it mean? Fundamentally, it means that that urge of learning as an asset of the species, once that you have the science, this urge becomes something conditionated to the existence of an institution. So it's associated the capability of learning with the scholar institution. And inside this queue, you have the agent, that's the teacher, the professor. The urge of getting in touch with the sacred, this luminous impulse, it's also related to institutions. So the religious institutions got stronger, and inside the religious institutions, the religious agent. The same way we have the collective organization, it becomes a legal institution and it has its own agents. And the same way, the institution of caring become it starts producing its own agents. What is the implication of this movement that science has of strengthening institutions and put our urges or our assets as a species inside institutions? Fundamentally, the consequence is if I want to talk to God, I need someone to mediate this. If I want to talk to knowledge, I need someone to mediate. If I want to talk to a judge, I need an agent. And if I want to talk to my body, I also need an agent. What does it mean? It means that we not only the science got the institutions stronger, but it creates intermediaries that are the people that are doing what the species built as an asset. And it seems that you can only learn at school. No, it seems that you can only take care of someone in a health institution. And no, and it seems that you can only find the sacred inside a religious institution. And no, so this is an important consequence of the way that the scientific project works to rescue the attributes of the species, and it goes through some type of institutional filtering that puts agents to create this control. So it's a biopolitical exercise to control politics to control the bodies. So what do we see here? We see the stock of ancestral knowledge That's a heritage of the species, going through a system that classifies science. So the scientific methodology, it's a method to classify and it validates one type of knowledge or ends a knowledge or invalidate one knowledge. So you have the alchemistry, it goes through the filtering of methodology and becomes chemistry. But the basis of chemistry comes from alchemistry. So, of the point of view of the field of health, what it happens is that this capability of taking care of the species, when you go through this filtering,
The care that happens in the private place associated to everyone who are in this private space and has the maintenance of the species as an end. So when the scientific method is appropriated from care, it transforms care in clinic, and clinic comes from the private space and goes to the public space. It comes from the female care area and is associated to the male action. It stops being an attribute from the species and becomes a service to the species. So this transmission of the care produces invisibilities of the care done by women, because now it's men doing it. It is a work that is still done by women, but it's not paid. It's only paid in the public sphere, not the private sphere. So science had this exercise of filtering knowledge that we as a species have inherited for thousands of years. And with that, we have another very important matter. Remember, I said science is part of a bigger project, and one of the bases of this project of capitalism is having good new goods to be sold regularly. And the process of producing our alienation is part of building or developing science itself. What do I mean by that? Who here remembers or knows the story of 3 generations of their families? We lost the reference of where we came from. We lost our reference as a species in the planet. In the environment of science, everything looks so new. Everything seems to be just created, and we lose the ability of understanding that learning, taking care, communicating, representing, it has to do with the sacred. It, it's nothing new, nor the abstract control of the bodies. And then science produces an exercise that is very important because it strengthens this exercise of control once the base of the control is frustration. So it's an abstract control of the collective. What is a scene? The scene doesn't exist and concretely. A scene is a set of inadequate actions to a set of rules that was established called commandment. What is a crime? The crime does not exist. There is a person that may have not obeyed the rules, and then it's called a crime. What is the illness? Illness does not exist. What do I mean by that? Have you ever been to the library and borrowed a disease or a crime or a sin? No, because these abstractions exist and they are embedded as a way to control the bodies. And these abstractions are old, 70,000 years ago it started, and they are a form of control. So we get here to another lapse of time, and we get to 1960. The kids of the World War survivors. The Second World War ends in 1945. The kids after Second World War are in teenagers, are becoming young adults in the 60s, and the experience of certain social groups, especially the ones associated to the middle classes, the white European classes, and also organized groups in the US fighting for civil rights. These groups, they look at this organized structure of the collective life and start questioning all of it. So, is it really possible to learn only inside a school? Is it really only possible to have contact with the sacred inside a religious institution? I wonder if there are other ways of taking care. So this movement called counterculture of the 60s starts to exercise the pursuit for alternatives. And in this desire to look for and find alternatives, we start to build this whole set of integrative practices that I'm going to start mentioning now. And to give some background, we're going to have a second reading. Now it's the declaration of Alma-Ata about primary care. The International Conference of Primary Care in Alma-Ata in the 12th of September of 1978, expressing the need of an urgent action of all governments, of all that work in the fields of health and development and the world community to promote the health of all people in the world, has come to the following statement. It is the right and the duty of all people to participate individually and collectively of the planning and the execution of their health care. The primary health care are based on the local level for forwarding the situations in those who work in the field of health, physicians, nurses, supporters, and community agents, as applied, as well as the traditional practice is necessary that are trained to work socially and technically besides the health team to reply to the expressed need of health from their community. So this is the first time that WHO talks about the traditional medicine. So in 78, it is the first time that what maintained the human species alive for years is mentioned. So the forms of care that are not the so-called biomedical or Western medicine model. So how does this movement of start talking about that happens? It goes from that alternative path. So people start looking for ways or rescuing ways that are millennium there for millennia, and like the experience of the incense experience or the tea ritual or herbs rituals around the fire with water, with plants that can broaden our perception. And so this set of actions makes the alternative movement to have two groups which start operating. One group will consider the heritage of the species, or especially the traditional Chinese medicine, and say, okay, this is 5,000 years of history, 5,000 years of reflection on how to diagnose, how to take care. They look at the Ayurvedic medicine the same way and their set of practices, and they look at the possibility of groups that used to be invisible but would maintain their health and survival and well-being. Very well. So this group is going to look at this set of knowledge as a heritage of the species and as the key element of public policy so that the access to all is obtained. Another group is created at that time, and they look at all these millennia practices and identifying that real commodities for the great health market. And so, when back in 1978 the WHO talks for the first time that if we want health for all in the 2000s, we needed to bring the caretakers, the curators, the practice people from the medicinal, the traditional practice back, otherwise we won't have health, because in 78 there was the program of traditional medicine in WHO, which was a program that was based mainly on the Chinese traditional medicine. Now, not the classic, but the traditional Chinese medicine. And this traditional Chinese medicine did an important exercise of maintaining their traditional medicines to the point that the last review on this illness classification, that is the 11th edition, you have in the last chapter the diagnosis of the traditional Chinese medicine. And now it's in discussion the incorporation of this classification, the Ayurveda and the Unani medicines, which are medical rationalities that are more connected to India. Well, so the alternative produces that outlook to our stock of knowledge and the desire of making this experience common. What happens is that this other group that looks at that as a commodity in the early 90s creates the concept of complementary medicine. I can be accused here because I'm denying what I have written in 2002 in my doctorate, which I understand as complementary now is different from what I understood in 2002, right? So, because now I understand that complementary is an arrangement and it's a neoliberal arrangement of strategies to make these practices fit in the health market. But what happens is that in 1992, you give name and you bring the project of the evidence-based medicine. And in quotations, the owners of the great market of health have a conditionality. So, very well, if you want to embed, introduce these practices that are non-biomedical in the medical market, you will have to produce convincing scientific evidence. So, the use of evidence for research for non-biomedical practices is a limitation, is a way to control it. If you want to get in, you are conditioned to come as long as. But there is evidence for a lot of things. But what happens is that they are like, oh, this evidence is this, but now the bar is higher because the demand is higher. So the complementary medicine or complementary practices become secondary in this model, in this culture of care. So, as a resistance to that, in the end of the 2000s, you build a concept of integrative, right? And the integrative is a different thing because it is a matter of a paradigm, which, in a certain way, it is a reform on the scientific model because the scientific model is built mainly on the pair of opposites, on polarity.
So, or it's situated one pole or in the other pole. What do I mean? How we are going to make an effective way to embed the practice that we have seen from the therapeutic using incense in the biomedic caring. How can we embed to bring to our culture of caring, of taking care, the possibility of people trying their sickness process as a biographic experience, being part of the biography of this person, what we are also that because we have survived the events that made us sick or accidents. So this is also part of us. So health is not getting sick or interrupting symptoms. Health is the capability of surviving well the symptoms when we get sick or the accidents that we go through. Health is a broader aspect than a complete well-being. Health is the possibility of broaden the margins of the human experience. So when we're talking about the integrative, we are putting a challenge in the paradigm that is different from the complementary. It is important. Yes, it is important because this taking care culture, the biomedical taking care culture, it needs to be broadened of the point of view, for example, of the relationships. If the foundation of this model of this taking care is in the mediation of a professional, so there's a relation that's a relationship of asymmetry of power. The one that brings the experience of being sick, it doesn't come as someone that has a knowledge. The person cannot find a health professional as being someone that's trying so that someone that has experience with that event. The person comes in a different position, and the health professional is the one that's going to operate to remove the person from that condition. This way of caring, it doesn't create autonomy. We don't have emancipation with that. It doesn't build the view of the events of life as being part of the life itself. So this action of the integrative, it brings us some questions that are quite important. For example, how we how we can explain the contradiction that we have nowadays, because there's a set of discussions, contemporary discussions, based on this scientific evidence that states that the majority of the integrative practice, they don't have enough evidence to be considered as part of the healthcare. So how can we explain that the number of people using non-biomedic practice and the number of professionals that has this biomedic graduation is growing in the last decades? How do we explain this contradiction? So people are stupid. This is a possible explanation because they don't believe in evidence. This is another explanation. Or people have experiences with these models of caring that in the biomedicine they don't have. This is another explanation, but it's a contradiction that challenge us in contemporary. So how are we going to integrate other knowledges, or how do we explain this contradiction? How can we replace? How can we can have more experiences based on the abundance than scarcity? Our human experience have been managing scarcity. Few of us have the experience of managing abundance and is not related to consumption because the set of the practice of the scientific model is not sustainable. The colonialism, the capitalist relationships, this biomedic caring culture, these practices made life on planet it's threatening the life on the planet. So they're not sustainable. All of this based on scarcity. How can we go to another existence level, thinking integrativity, recovering our human experience of thousands of years of survivals with this technology and knowledge that science is developing? Because it's not about replacing, it's not about choosing one or the other. It's not about creating parallels. The challenge is stop producing injustice, this epistemic injustice. Because if we have an abundance of possibilities, if we can get the difference as something that make us rich, we have the possibility to start understanding that the challenge is what we can have as the best in us, and not just one way of existing and producing care. So this is another element that challenge us to think integrativity. How can we can embed this in the health system that you in the public health system and the private health system in Brazil? How we can have medical rationality and not only therapeutical techniques? Because this is an important difference that the concept of medical rationality brought to us. Because the set of therapeutical techniques, they are just a piece of a rationality. What do I mean? Acupuncture is a therapeutical technique. The classic Chinese medicine or traditional Chinese medicine is part of a view of the human being as a species and the way that the bodies work, the way that the body is created, the internal and external relationship of these bodies. How can we bring this inside the health system? And more, how can we bring this knowing that the classic Chinese medicine has their records 5,000 years ago that went through the influence of Taoism, with Confucianism, with the influence of a communist revolution that makes the classic name to traditional, that recovers the practice of classic medicine to make sure that the people have health, because there was a lot of people needing assistance. So there is the possibility at the same time that's opening also room for the Western medicine, creating schools that were funded by the Kellogg Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, to be implemented in the entire world, also in China. How do we bring all this framework of the economy of a socialist market inside the health system? Can we do is just add acupuncture, auricular therapy, but we are not being able to add. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about some simple elements, for example, that are the part of the traditional Chinese medicine, for example, eating well, move your body well, to sleep well, to breathe well, to have a good moment. If we have this prescription, we are going to take care of people in a better way. But our set of prescription doesn't go through this. It goes through drugs. So the challenge of bringing this practice to our models of caring, it's a challenge. It's part of the complementary. The complementary is conditioned by the evidences. And complementary is important because this action improves the caring, but we need to move forward to go beyond so we can change the knowledge with different foundations. We need to add knowledge. How we are going to add knowledge if we don't have a hierarchy of knowledge? Because if we bring a professional, I don't know you, but if you want me to tell you how we have a healthcare professional, I can describe step by step and the necessary evidence to become a health professional. But if you want me to explain how to become someone that you're going to bless someone, or if you're going to deliver a baby, and that you can have a recognition on the community and you are respected, I don't know how you can become this professional and what are the foundations that support this professional in the community. So how we're going to bring here what we don't know without creating this type of colony. So I think that the main fundamental here of the integrative practice, I'm not denying the complementary practice, but I'm saying that that arrangement of the 90s is not enough for the epistemic foundations for a better care. Somehow it's related to a poem of Shan Tzu that was a Taoist of the fourth century, the one that wants to have the right without the wrong, the order without the disorder, doesn't know the principles of the heaven and earth. You cannot see how things get together. Can the man be attached only to sky and not know about the earth? Correlates. To know one is to know the other. To refuse one is to refuse both. Can a man to be attached to the positive without any negative to have a contrast to what is positive? So when we fixate in one way of building knowledge and caring, we indeed recognize that there are others. But this model of producing science that we're still in the scarcity of war, of colonialism, of capitalism, it's a model that classifies what is going to be considered from inside positive and what comes from outside with less importance. We need to break this structure to integrate. And it's a huge challenge because it goes from the scarcity and go to the paradigm of abundancy. And with that, I would like to end also with a saying from Newton, also the 17th century, that is, what we know is a drop, what we ignore is an ocean. Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you, Nelson, for your presentation. Now we're going for Q&A. So if you are watching us on the internet, you can write in the chat. So I invite you to write on YouTube, to subscribe in our channel. So here in Campinas, if you can talk to someone with production, you can come here and ask your question, or you can send a paper. I can read the question here for you. So to start, Nelson, this year we are celebrating 20 years of Café Filosófico, and we are reviewing things on our history. So we have selected an old one to show to you to make a comment. So let's see.
So the discourse that the biologic psychiatrist to say that can solve everything, the ones that uses drugs can handle everything, it's not supported in the clinic. And who we are, and as we are in the clinic, we see that, of course, medication is an important part of the scenario. It exists, it causes changes, and in many cases it is a positive change, people that have some situations of suffering, but actually it is rare if you consider the number of people in clinics these days that are completely submitted to this description that, oh, there is only one wrong thing with my brain. That's why I say that this constitution of bioidentity, it ends up competing with the more traditional methods of subjectivity. So individuals still look for a meaning for that experience that they are having. So the biological experience is not enough for individuals and to really calm down individuals. Oh, I just agree with him. I believe we have we agree on the perspective that science will not be enough to erase our ancestral experience, building meaning, looking for traditional ways, looking for what is called bioidentity, which is a phenomenon that comes inside medicalization, which is a concept developed in the 80s that tries to explain, like Ivan Illich mainly was someone that really had a beautiful description in a book in 1974 discussing iatrogenesis. And the actions of these models of care often produce secondary effects that are as or even are as bad or worse than the effects they try to address. And one of the effects related to that is the creation of bioidentities. And what does it mean? So once you have a diagnosis, it gets into the person as a label, and the person becomes conditioned to building the whole lifestyle identified with that label and reduced to it. So you build a bioidentity based on that label. So a contemporary way, abstract way of controlling the bodies, for example, is the notion of risk. Risk, illness, crime, sin. It's all abstraction. Risk is a likelihood. There is no guarantee that this likelihood is possible. I'm not denying science and I'm not denying statistics. What I mean is the likelihood is not a guarantee that it is going to happen. So this relation is key when we are discussing the meaning of the experience. The meaning of the experience is not going only through having a diagnosis, having a name for that set of elements. The meaning of the experience is understanding the body, the experience, what is being incorporated, and more than that, what I have as a resource to manage what is going on. This set of experiences is what builds the meaning for the event of sickness. So I agree with Rosano completely. I believe that really If we stop looking at the illness of sickness as an isolated event of life and start understanding it as a biographic construction, it changes our relationship with being sick. So there were some comments and some questions. I'm going to read two. Luisa says, how wonderful to see this gathering with Professor Nelson. And Fatima says, congratulations uh, for getting this person for us. And so we are going to have now another question. I'm Bruno Di Conti, an economy professor at Unicamp, and I'm the director of the Confucio Institute at Unicamp. That's why I have contact with the Chinese contact. And so before anything, I would like to thank the Chinese director, Professor Gao of the Confucio Institute, and the presence of some of the workers and participants of the public health system in Campinas, including my father. I'm very proud of having without Carminha and Raquel and more people that are present tonight that have worked so hard for the integration of all the limits that Nelson mentioned of integrative practices in the public service in Campinas. And so, Nelson, congratulations. It was a very provoking talk, and I would like to ask about our traditional medicine of our originary people in the Americas, in Brazil. I know this is something that you have been studying, you have been working with our indigenous students that are now part of our body of students. So do you think there has been a rescue of these practices and the fact of us having at Unicamp and in other universities indigenous students, how much is it really important for rescuing this traditional medicine of our originary people? Well, Bruno, I would like to also thank the presence of this whole generation that built the public service, health service in Campinas, and the existence of integrative practices in the public health system in Campinas. I believe that indigenous medicines are a frontier for us, and most of us have absolutely no knowledge of the ways of their workings. And my colleague and research partner Rafael is here with me, and we have worked on this project together, and we have seen that really for us to have this gathering of knowledges, we have to refund our relationships of research. Basically, I'm talking about having a question, asking ourselves, who gives you the right to talk for someone else, especially someone else that can talk for themselves? So when we get in contact with indigenous students, I don't know if you all know, but since 2019, we started having a regular entrance of indigenous alumni at Unicamp, a very new policy of access to indigenous students through an entrance examination that is specific for them. What we have seen past 5 years, that we have around 400 students of 40 different ethnicities at Unicamp, and that the access is just the first step in this challenge, because staying demands us to recognize the structural violence we produce when we ensure some access, but we don't ensure the epistemic access. What do I mean by that? Access to the ways of thinking, access to the practices of representing, access to the practices of care. So we bring students to the university, but we haven't opened a space for their knowledge to exist within. So I believe this is a frontier of knowledge for us. this is an epistemic frontier of knowledge building, and we have to have collaborative research and assume some principles that the feminist movement has built, and the people are politics, so they are political. So the studies of people with disability have built about nothing about us without us. So we don't need to talk for them, we need to talk to them, not for them. So that is a great challenge. And to make it worse, we know more about the traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda medicine, the homeopathy, about the anthroposophic medicine, than we know about phytotherapy of the indigenous people in Brazil, who are great survivors. There are people, there are groups that survive for 523 years of permanent attacks. There is a movement going on. I talked about the gathering of knowledges, which is a huge project being developed by Professor José Jorge de Carvalho at UNB and has expanded to other places, including here. We have been trying to think of ways of doing it. So, for example, it has generated, last June, we had a forum at Unicamp where we invited Master Shapira. She is a traditional Tapajó healer, sorry, a Pataxó traditional healer from the south of Bahia. She can't read, she can't write, but she can draw and recite the use of over 1,000 plants for human care. She was talking, she was drawing, she was explaining, and a student was editing her speech, and that ensured to her the title of honoris causa doctor by the Federal University of Minas Gerais. So this movement has grown. It has over 20 years now of experience in UNB and in other universities, and here we have tried to have this effort as well, because we are in the frontier of knowledge. So how can we bring inside without producing more violence? How can we really listen to the different? These are different ways of thinking, of organizing themselves in a space, of organizing themselves in time and in experience. And we have to give some steps back to be able to listen to all that, to learn, because it's not about saying we don't know. We know a lot of things, but our knowledge is not enough to embed what they know. We know how to colonize what they do. Our experience has been colonizing our knowledge. We either give one step back and we realize that who can't communicate, it's us, and so the challenge is ours of doing it together, or we will produce domination and colonization once again. We have a video question from the psychologist and the traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, Octavio Augusto Contatori. Good evening. Professor Nelson, how can you deal with so diverging discourses? Professionals of the medical area believe that their practice is efficient, and they say they are graduated in traditional Chinese medicine, and they have learned the techniques in acupuncture, and they want to apply this traditional knowledge. Other professionals in the healthcare department say that acupuncture done by physicians is scientific-based practice. And then we have people in the field of an orthodox field claim that acupuncture is not evidence-based so it shouldn't be present in the public health system. So we have polarizing and diverging discourses. How can we get through this? Thank you.
So for those who doesn't know, Otávio is one of a person that has a lot of the classical Chinese medicine. He had a background with the Master Liu Pailin in São Paulo, so he has a lot of knowledge of this framework. So I think that's important, the question he states, because if the desire is to embed rationalities with the set of knowledges, what he's asking is none of the therapeutical techniques we are able to embed. Why? What have we seen? We have seen a dispute, especially of the category, the professional category of the physicians, trying to have the control of the use of acupuncture. So, what I understand, answering his question, there's an action of acupuncture that's associated to rescuing these traditional knowledges that are that are still related to because acupuncture is one technique among many. It's associated to the use of meditation, of using body practice, physiotherapy, food. So it's one therapy among others that are part of this culture of caring. So there are professionals that are trying to rescue this traditional dimension in this set of practice. There are professionals that look at acupuncture, as Otávio mentioned, as the scientific one. That's the exercise of the complementary practice. So they bring this as a complement to broaden this frontier of this culture of caring. Because effectively, it's good if I can take care without drugs, without medicines, if I can have a way of treating without using medicine, I can reduce intoxication, I can reduce side effects. So the actions of caring, of a lot of practice that are non-biomedical ones, they are actions that don't use medicine, and that's important to be embedded in the biomedic model, for sure. But it's a dimension that's complementary. So what do we have here? The ones that have an acupuncture trying to rescue the classic Chinese medicine, the traditional framework of caring, the ones that use acupuncture as a complementary practice to the biomedic model, and the ones that still see acupuncture as a great challenge to broaden the relationships in the area of health. Because this is a process that's going through years of actions of the regional boards of different categories of professionals related to healthcare, trying to have the control and the domain of the practice of acupuncture. So we have people that see this relationship of power that are associated to acupuncture as an exercise to broaden the asymmetry of power in the field of health. So I would say that we have these elements associated to the different practices of acupuncture. We have some other comments. Gabriel Kangangi congratulates Café Filosófico for the 20 years. Meseli Fagundi says that if she's alive today, it's thanks to the traditional Chinese medicine. Since 11 years ago, she's going through this. Alexa Vieira said this is an amazing topic. I've been living the traditional Chinese medicine for a lot of years to get the cure. And Marise Prado said that the lecture was amazing and she's thanking you. And now we have a question, that the question from Lucas Meira. Lucas Meira was your student in graduation, and he has this question. Professor, how to go from the paradigm of scarcity and have this change? This is the question of 1 million of everything. I think that, of my point of view, we accept the difference as an asset. The difference is not a liability that we need to manage. We are not to end the difference. We are not going to eliminate the experience of difference among us. So if the experience, we cannot do this with the experience, the conflict we cannot avoid. If we cannot avoid the conflict, the step would be to transform the conflict in something that we can build from the difference as a rich thing, is that we can build other frontiers of knowledge. To talk is easy, is really easy. To do is more difficult. So the challenge is big, and for that, I've been working with the idea of this emancipated caring, how we can take care of a person without being so responsible for that person, and taking care and creating space so that person can produce more autonomy than heteronomy. So our experience in the model of organization of the collective life that we have a heteronomy experience. We don't choose, not even our name. When we are born, I don't know you, but when I was born, I was given a name, and with this name, I received a gender performance. Up to the 50 years old, I have never thought about this, to be honest. But if me, Nelson, if I felt like Sophia, certainly I would have to handle this, this expression earlier in my life. So this is our experience of heteronomy. We don't choose our names. Then all the places that we go, the agents of the institutions name things for us. So if I want the knowledge, I have a professor that gives me this to me. If I want to talk to God, I have a religious person. If I want to talk to my body, I have a professional for that. We have always this person. So when can we name things? So this is a process, because I'm not going to wake up tomorrow morning, look at the mirror and say, oh, now I'm an autonomous person. Autonomy is a process. And Paulo Freire described pedagogy of autonomy. Is it possible to teach autonomy? It's possible to have this autonomy exercise. How? Who has power can use the power to create context, to create process, so the other can try and make decisions in the process and broaden their autonomy. So it means replace heteronomy for autonomy. Because it's deceiving to say, for example, when we have the health teaching, we're talking about empathy. I can have empathy. I can be able to see myself on the other person's shoe, but when I need to make a decision to have a diagnosis and prescribe, I do it by myself. That's good that you are sensible to the other. But when the other is going to participate in the making this in the process to make the decision. So I believe, Lucas, that the exercise we had experiences that are possible to think about this. Of I cannot think that I don't study for many years. I cannot pretend that I don't know. But I can use what I know as a possibility of not producing silence. And this is a political ethical point of view that Paulo Freire invites us to use. And as a health professional, I'm not a health professional, but I work in a medicine school with health professionals. And as that, the political ethical exercise is an exercise to create process that I just I will not give names to things by the other, but I'm opening a space to discuss this new nomenclature of producing autonomy. Maybe this will take us to a caring that emancipate and not only produce this condition of power and take us to a place to create integrative practice. But for that, we also need to learn to live in the frontier of knowledge because all of our academic training is to leave the frontiers, is to go to a pole. What is a professional identity? Is to have a position of someone that knows a set of things. If we learn to live in the frontier, maybe we learn the exercise of pedagogy of frontier. How can I teach someone to live at the same time to go through different knowledge experiences, different way of explaining the sickness, different ways of accessing the caring with elements that are concrete and abstract, magical elements, religious elements, scientific elements. But this is a challenge. This is the frontier of knowledge that we are inserted. And I understand that the integrative practice in health, complementary and integrative in health, they invite us to take steps towards this direction of expanding the frontiers of caring, the frontiers of the production of knowledge. So, Lucas, we cannot ensure this. We have desires. One question that we have from the audience, from Anderson Souza. Anderson Souza says that your criticism to the scientific methodology or how human beings use this methodology through the institutions that goes through the capitalist society that we live in. This can be used in a cautious way, but I don't imagine a complex society without using the scientific practice. The way that I understand, Anderson, we don't have science without human beings. The way that I see it, science is a consequence of the set of human practice. And I agree. I think that's possible to have political and ethical positioning for the use of the scientific methodology. I can use the knowledge to silence and submit people, and I can use knowledge to emancipate and to create new frontiers of knowledge. Is a personal positioning of the exercise of a methodology, but we don't have a methodology outside people. The methodology is a product of the relationships. And how you use this, it doesn't rely on, as a principle, on a technology. Technology is not good or bad. It can be used to produce life or to produce death. The choice is made by humans of the use of technology. So I believe that's possible to plant seeds of life, and it's possible plant seeds of death. But these are human actions. These are not divine actions, are not from the nature. We're talking about actions that are based with awareness or not, on our relationships. So I don't see the possibility about thinking a scientific methodology outside the human being, without the action of human being. It's the human being that is going to have this political ethical positioning for the action using the methodology. So we got to the end of Café Filosófico, but I'm not going to end here before letting you close the evening. Thank you.
Very well. So I'd like to thank you all and say that it has been a pleasure to have you all here to help me in this talk. I would say it's been very difficult to do that. I've been a professor for 30 years, but really sitting here has a weight more than just talking at university. And so I would like to thank you for the opportunity of being here celebrating the 20 years of the cafe. And I think it is necessary to have another 20 and then another 20 for us to produce more knowledge and broaden our frontiers of knowledge. I thank Bruno for the invitation. I thank CPFL for this production. And I thank
Nelson, eu
you
que
all.
agradeço e,
And
por
I
favor,
thank you,
aplausos.
Felipe. Thank you, Nelson. And a round of applause for him. Nelson, thank you once again. Thank you all that came here and who are watching us online. And I would like to thank for our curator who is here today and remind you that next week we are going to be on Thursday, again on our traditional day of recording, and on the 14th with the traditional Chinese medicine, the clinical contributions with Gustavo Colano Cunha, and on the 9th we are going to have the interchange Brazil-China, the relation of the sky and humanity, and a debate with Julieta Jerusalinski. And the two last warnings. Follow us on our social media. And if you are here present in Campinas, we have mentioned that if you want to take pictures, please be my guest and just tag us on Instagram. It's going to be a pleasure to repost your messages so we can see another vision of the world that are different from the ones that built us, and it can bring new perspectives about ourselves. In the special series about China, Confucius lived in China 2,500 years ago. After all, what Confucius has to say, the unity between heaven and humanity, so we stop looking at the divine, look to the terrain to be more humane to the other. Their responsibility is humanity. Knowledge is collective, and this pursuit for knowledge, for enlightenment, has to be public, has to be with the other. Saturday, 10 p.m. at Café Filosófico. And on Sunday, electronic intoxication not reduced to uh, having a phone on the hands of a child. So, affection, desires, and conflicts in a world in transition. Many parents and caretakers trying to obtain responses, answers about the behaviors of their kids, looking up on the internet. Do you think the immediate answers really serve all kids in their particularities? The current childhood in debate. Nothing replaces the richness of playing, of talking. Café Filosófico, Sunday at 7 p.m.